In the automotive industry, there are a handful of engines which have become absolutely legendary, and although the 2JZ might be slightly overhyped by Mark IV super fanboys, there's no denying that it is a really badass engine with a huge amount of potential. Now, the Barra flew kind of under the radar because it's not really available in the US and it never was, so a lot of people here don't even know about it, but it's arguably a better engine than the 2JZ. Grab some popcorn and sit down because today we're going to compare the Barra and the 2JZ. Beginning its life in 2002, the Barra was built and developed in Australia. Realistically, it can trace its roots back to the inline-six engine that Ford used in the 1980s and 1990s, which can trace its roots all the way back to 1959 with the US Ford Falcon Compact. While the Barra doesn't have a massive amount of similarities with those old inline-six engines, they laid the foundation that the Barra was built on. If you're watching this video and you've never heard of the Barra, or maybe you've heard of it a few times but you have no idea what it's about, you're not alone. This engine was never available in the US and it was only available in New Zealand and Australia, compared to the 2JZ, which was available all over the world, Japan, US, and pretty much the majority of major countries. The 2JZ was produced from 1991 to 2002. When Toyota was still producing the 2JZ, you could find it in a bunch of different applications. The 2JZ GTE specifically was available in the Toyota Aristo and the Toyota Supra. Its use in the Supra, in part, is what made it so popular and so legendary. Like we mentioned a second ago, the 2JZ was used all over the world in a bunch of different variations in all sorts of different applications compared to the Barra, which was only available in New Zealand and Australia. The difference in availability between these two engines is massive. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, the Barra is everywhere. It's very plentiful and they are dirt cheap to buy. But if you're outside of Australia or New Zealand, you're pretty much unlikely to find a Barra engine unless you specifically import one into your country. The big difference in availability also makes a big difference in aftermarket support, which we'll talk about just a little bit later. To give you a rundown on some basic information, the Barra is a 4-liter inline-six with dual overhead cams, variable valve timing, a cast iron block, cast aluminum cylinder head. As stated earlier, some variants are turbocharged, and power outputs range from 209 horsepower and 276 pound-feet all the way up to 436 horsepower and 425 pound-feet. The 2JZ, on the other hand, is a 3-liter inline-six with dual overhead cams, variable valve timing on the later engines, cast iron block, cast aluminum cylinder head with some turbo and non-turbo variants, just like the Barra. Power outputs on the 2JZ range from 212 horsepower and 209 pound-feet up to 321 horsepower and 320 pound-feet. It should be noted that it's widely argued that Toyota underrated the power output of the 2JZ GTE to conform to Japan's gentleman agreement. In all actuality, the 2JZ probably makes more than 320 horsepower, which was that advertised number. Now, I doubt you care about stock power output, and really, I don't care much about stock power output either. Most enthusiasts who are buying or swapping these engines into their cars aren't going to leave them stock, so stock power is kind of irrelevant. Plus, both of these engines can make way more power than they were originally designed for with some simple bolt-ons and a larger turbo. On paper, these engines seem fairly similar, with the biggest difference being displacement. And although boost is a great way to add power to any engine, adding more displacement is basically the ultimate way to increase power output. The Barra is well known for having a lot of low-end power and a lot of mid-range power, most of which can be attributed to the fact that it has 4 liters of displacement compared to 3 liters of displacement on the 2JZ. Of course, everyone on the internet only seems to care about peak power figures, but the power throughout the entire rev range is significantly more important for street use. That's something that the Barra is very, very good at. Sure, both engines can make a huge amount of low-end torque with a small and efficient turbo like a Borg-Warner EFR, but the Barra is inherently going to make a better torque curve because of the larger displacement. This brings us to the blocks, where both engines are well known for being able to support massive amounts of power. The unfortunate downside of the Barra is that it is a physically large engine. With the 4-liter displacement, the Barra is very long, very tall, very wide, and very heavy. It's a physically massive engine and pretty much can't fit into a lot of applications. Part of the reason that the Barra is as large as it is because of the amount of material Ford used to construct the block and the large bore spacing. On top of that, the block features a lot of material in all the right places and a lot of ribbing compared to the 2JZ block. In all actuality, it's only about 5 to 10 millimeters wider than a 2JZ or RB26 block, but it's significantly longer, and once you add on the cylinder head, it is way taller. To say that the Barra block is really strong would be a massive understatement. And for an example of this, we can look at Dynamite Performance. Now, their drag car is powered by a Barra engine, and it makes over 2,000 horsepower and spins over 10,000 RPM on a totally stock block and cylinder head. Sure, the bottom end is completely built, but the block itself is stock, and that's a big testament to how strong the block is. 2,000 horsepower is a massive number. The 2JZ block is also very strong, and although it offers less total displacement than the Barra, it's the better block overall. Compared to the Barra block, the 2J block is significantly lighter and smaller. Plus, the actual material used to cast the 2J block is stronger than the material used to cast the Barra block. The big thing with the 2JZ is that it offers more material between the cylinders, around 7mm, where the Barra offers 3 to 4mm. Another thing to note is that the 2JZ has a Siamese bore design, which basically means there is solid metal between the bores. That difference might sound really small, but when you're making big power, that can be the difference between a blown up engine and a well-running engine. Looking more closely at the cylinder head on the Barra reveals just how massive it is. The cylinder head on the Barra is about 6 inches longer than the 2JZ head, which really demonstrates how large this engine is. It features dual overhead cams and 4 valves per cylinder, all of which is driven by a timing chain rather than a timing belt. Unfortunately, 2 of the weakest points of the Barra engine live in the cylinder head, and that's the head bolts and valve springs. The head bolts aren't insanely strong, and they are prone to stretching under extreme cylinder pressure once you start to turn the boost up. The valve springs are also too weak to hold up to the increased boost pressure, and you have to replace them if you want to make big power. One really nice feature you'll find on many but not all Barra engines is variable valve timing on both camshafts. The dual cam timing system massively improves efficiency and low end power and top end power. For turbocharged Barras, the dual cam timing system also improves turbo spool up, ultimately helping the Barra make more low end power and have great throttle response. The 2JZ uses a simple shim over bucket design. This system works by basically having the camshaft lobe press down on a bucket which sits over the spring. This is a pretty basic system, but it gets the job done. It also features Toyota's VVTi system, which allows camshaft timing to be changed on the fly. Now, if it's a 2J that was destined for use in the US, it probably doesn't have VVT unless somebody swapped that type of cylinder head on it. Either way you go, VVT or not VVT, the 2JZ head flows really well and offers a lot of performance. As we said a minute ago, both blocks are capable of supporting upwards of 1500 horsepower. But what about the stock bottom ends? What can each engine do with a stock bottom end, and what's its limits? Now with the Barra, the rods, pistons, and crank are all massive overkill for the stock power output. Unfortunately, one of the few weak points of the Barra engine is in the bottom end, which is the oil pump gears, which are known for basically shredding to pieces once you start to make big power. Other notable features on the bottom end of the Barra are the oil pan bolts, which screw in horizontally to the crankcaps and effectively makes the oil sump a stressed member of the bottom end. The windage tray also helps tie together all the main caps and improve bottom end rigidity. On a totally stock bottom end, the Barra is capable of producing 600 or 700 horsepower, and I know there are people who have pushed past that number, but as a general safe number, 600 to 700 horsepower is what you're going to get out of a Barra stock bottom end. Of course, this is with different valve springs and different head bolts on the head. Now, it's not really a secret that the 2JZ has a strong bottom end. I think pretty much everyone on the internet knows that by now. It has really strong rods, really strong pistons, and a really strong crank. You gotta remember, the 2JZ was built back when Toyota over-engineered everything, and they made everything in the engine way stronger than it needed to be for reliability's sake. Where it's common to see a Barra make 600, maybe 700 horsepower, you can see a lot of 2JZ engines making 700 or 800 horsepower with a good tune. Now, when you compare the peak power numbers, they might seem pretty similar. Barra can make 600 to 700 horsepower and the JZ can make 700, 800 horsepower. But if you factor in the difference in displacement, it's clear that the JZ definitely has the stronger bottom end. That being said, both of these engines are very, very strong in stock form, and you shouldn't just say that one is definitely better solely based on the fact that it has a slightly stronger bottom end. As we mentioned at the start, the reason many of us in the US don't even know about the Barra engine is because it was never available here. Ordinarily, this isn't a problem, but engines which become popular in the US end up having a lot more aftermarket support than engines which are popular outside the US, which can make or break an engine in the long run. If the Barra was available in the US, it would definitely have a much larger aftermarket than it currently does, and it would be very popular for engine swaps in the US. That being said, if you live in Australia or New Zealand, the Barra is a pretty awesome engine because there are a lot of them out there and they can be had for pretty cheap, and the local aftermarket for those engines is pretty strong. While the aftermarket might not be as big as other engines, especially the 2JZ, it's still large enough that you can find the parts that you need relatively easily. It's pretty easy to replace the head bolts, valve springs, oil pump gears, and stick on a big turbo and make 600 horsepower plus. The 2JZ, on the other hand, was available in the US and pretty much all major countries around the world, available in naturally aspirated and turbocharged forms. With the 2JZ being readily available in the US, it has a lot more aftermarket support, since a lot of the major aftermarket companies in the world are based in the US. Now, that being said, if you you were to import a Barra into the US, you could probably find most of the parts that you need relatively easily. Thanks to the internet and worldwide shipping, it's not going to be crazy hard to buy and build a Barra here in the US. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult than it would be to do the same with a 2JZ. I would also like to note that the massive size difference of the Barra makes it significantly harder to swap into your project car than a 2JZ. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, the Barra is very cheap and easy to find. But if you're anywhere else in the world, you're going to have a hard time finding or buying one, compared to the 2JZ, which is available pretty much everywhere in the world for relatively cheap, and they're pretty easy to find. So I know we covered a lot in this video, and I want to get back to the original question at hand of which one is better, 2JZ or the Barra. Both are really strong, both have a lot of potential. They can both make 600 horsepower plus with some basic bolt-ons and a larger turbo, and both of them are pretty reliable while making big power numbers. So which one is better? Now, without your location factored into the equation, I would say that the 2JZ is the better engine overall. It's lighter, it's smaller, it has just as much power potential, and it has a larger aftermarket backing. But if you live in Australia or New Zealand, it's easy to argue that the Barra is the better engine because it's so readily available and so cheap because it was used in so many different applications. You can pick up a Barra in Australia or New Zealand for around 350 bucks, which is dirt cheap. Now, again, regardless of location, if you want one of these engines to swap into your project car, I still think the 2JZ is the better engine because it's lighter and smaller. The Barra is really large and it's going to be really difficult to fit into the majority of cars, where the JZ can fit into the majority of applications that were not initially designed for an inline-six engine. Which engine is better basically comes down to where you live, what your goals are, and how much power you want to make. We're really splitting hairs here by saying that the 2JZ is the better engine. Both engines are really, really good, and the argument could go either way. It's just in my opinion that the 2JZ is better because it's lighter and smaller and more readily available. But I want to know what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments below which one you think is better and why. Also, if you think there's anything I forgot to say, or if there's anything you want to add to the conversation, also let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there, be sure to hit the thumbs up button because it really helps out the channel, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.